Welcome back. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show tonight, the disturbing and dangerous crime spree that seems to be exploding right across the suburbs of Australia's largest city and right around the country, I suspect. It's a problem in many places. It involves young men, teenagers, many of them, some as young as 12 and 13, breaking into suburban homes in the middle of the night, early in the morning, terrifying sleeping residents, and then, with physical violence, they actually take car keys, steal those vehicles for dangerous joyrides. Joining me now is the Victorian Shadow Minister for Police, Brad Batten. He himself a former police officer. Brad, thanks for joining us. How seriously out of control do you believe these home invasions are, and do we think the police have got enough resources to actually fight this crime wave?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. The pictures you've just showed are terrifying all the way across our state, and we talk about Melbourne, but it's going all the way across Victoria. Do the police have the resources? I think it's been openly admitted they don't. The government promised they'd have 502 extra police by the middle of this term of Parliament, which is the 1st of July next year. But we've already seen, to date, there are 800 vacancies across our state. So when people are not at work because we've got those vacancies, that means we're going to have slower response times. One of our biggest concerns here in Victoria, Steve, is we don't record those response times. So we don't know how long they're taking. We don't know why they're being delayed. And if you're not actually analysing that work, you're never going to put the police in the right place at the right time. And the government needs to take responsibility for that.
Brad, we played audio of the Police Commissioner Shane Patton on Radio 3AW this morning at the start of the program. I was absolutely staggered listening to it, where he was asked, were there any incidents overnight? He said, probably 8 or 9, I'm not sure. 8 or 9, one would be too many.
1 a week's too many. 8 or 9 in a night is absolutely a crisis here in the state. And we've seen it happening in Brighton. And I know James Newbury and Brad Rosewell are speaking up about some of the issues along Bayside, where families are terrified of what's been going on. We heard a call to the radio this morning from Tacoma. I can give examples down in Clyde North. It doesn't matter where you live in Victoria at the moment. There is genuine fear that this could happen to you. And the victims of this is the part we have to never forget, Steve. They may think they can never live safely in their home again. They're resorting to things like cameras, they're resorting to things like alarms in their house. They'd never sleep the same again, because when they do go to bed, any noise is a fear that it's an intruder coming into their house. How can Daniel Andrews literally sit there and go, we haven't got a problem, when you've got the Chief Commissioner saying it's a problem? We know there's a lack of police. And the biggest issue we have is we haven't got the police on the road or the court system to deal with this. We need to change it before someone dies, or the circumstances are going to be horrific here in this state.
Yes, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that I think probably there will be a fatality. Someone's going to fight back at some point. Now, I mentioned also the appalling case of the 92-year-old man and his 88-year-old wife. We'll play for you in a moment their son-in-law, Thomas Hudson, and he describes exactly what happened to that elderly couple, which is just beyond belief. It's disgraceful. We see many of these offenders are out on bail. Now, I know that there was a case, Bayside, as you mentioned, where you had an 18-year-old who's now under arrest, and police did reveal that that 18-year-old has in the past been arrested for previous crimes of this nature. He even tried to carjack a woman at a red light and take her vehicle, and then ended up in a police chase. This idea that you get out on bail so easily, I mean, what's happening in the courts?
I think there's more to it than just the courts and bail, though, Steve. That's one of the things we've been trying to raise, and I know why we're talking about criminal justice reform. Where's the engagement with some of these kids prior? Because we can identify so often who the highest risk kids are that are going to become offenders. Yet we do nothing about it. We sit back or I shouldn't say we, the government sits back and does nothing about this. We've said to the government, there's programs around the world, identify the kids that are the most likely to become offenders and start putting services around them and their community. That's the way to reduce the crime. Because our ideal outcome, Steve, and I think everybody would agree with this, is we want no victims, therefore there's no crimes. That's our ultimate outcome. Now, we know we're not going to get to zero. However, as a government, it's so vital that we start to actually look back at why is this happening, who are committing the crimes, how can we intervene early and stop the crimes happening. If we can achieve that, in my future, I hope to be Minister one day. That'll be my goal, so we can prevent that. So therefore people can sleep safely, whether you're in Clyde North, Brighton, over in the western suburbs of Victoria or regional parts of our state.
In recent times, many of the police commissioners in Victoria, but not just Victoria, right around the country, have been reluctant to actually describe offenders. It's not helpful. It certainly doesn't help when the media is trying to talk about the sort of person involved. Shane Patton, again on radio this morning, very reluctant to get involved in a discussion about gangs or what ethnic background some of these youngsters might come from. Have a listen to this.
Would you believe that the majority of these offenders are young in these aggravated burglaries?
Yeah, that is.
What's that mean, under 18?
Oh, yeah, under 18, between, generally speaking, I think 13 to 18.
Is there any ethnic base to these crimes, for these gangs?
Oh, some of the gangs are formed based on race, yeah, absolutely.
Is that relevant in terms of dealing with it? To go to the communities, to talk to the... I think the officer I spoke to yesterday said African and Islander.
Africa and Islander. By and large, those who are represented in these ag-burgs are Caucasians. But you need to look at ratios and proportionalities if you're trying to break it down to that. But
the other point is that even if you're of African background, they're probably Australian-born, or very well likely to be Australian-born.
Exactly. So is it relevant? Not really, because we're just targeting the criminal offending.
No one wants to put their finger on exactly what's going on here, I suspect, Brad.
I agree with you on part of that, Steve. When we look at what's happening in the youth justice system as a whole, we've got a higher proportion of First Nations people in youth justice. We've got a higher proportion of kids from an African background. We've got a higher proportion of kids from Islander backgrounds. So instead of actually saying this is the big negative, why don't we sit back and go why, and then start to work through how we can work with some of these communities to give them the tools and opportunities that sometimes they may not get. We understand, and as an ex-police officer myself, I understand kids coming from other nations where police have zero respect or respected. We need to then intervene very early so we can actually create that new culture. At the moment, because that was left as a void, that culture's creating itself and it's not a positive one. So how do we take a step back, create a culture with Victoria Police and some of these community groups and some of these gangs, so then we can intervene with them and work in a really positive direction, whether it's through sport, arts, community groups or education. There's so many alternatives out there, but no one wants to talk about it because as soon as you mention it, you're a racist. And I think we have to get away from that and say, I want to run programs around African, Islander or First Nations people that I can genuinely engage them and give them the best opportunities to prevent committing crime in the future.
Well said. I agree completely. Home invasions are bad wherever they are, but to attack a 92-year-old man and an 88-year-old woman in their bed, terrifying for them. They now can't sleep. Their son-in-law, Thomas Hudson, spoke to the media today and described exactly what went on. Have a listen to this, Brad.
Raced inside through the front door after kicking that in and held John down on the bed, shoved his face into the pillow, and the pressure that they applied, or this guy applied onto the back of John's hands, tore his skin open. That's how hard they were holding him down for. So, it's appalling that these people have to do stuff like this.
We're talking about a 92-year-old man, and we've now seen vision today. The police have released this vision of exactly what those bruises looked like. I mean, look at what he's done to that poor man's hand. They put so much pressure on his limbs that he started bleeding. I mean, this is just atrocious. And these people, whoever they are, they kicked the door down. I hope police have some sort of task force formed already and that they've got these people under some sort of surveillance and that there are arrests quickly, because you can't have people like that out in the community.
Thomas will hit the heart of many people who are my age, and I'm going to say around about your age as well, Steve, in that gap there where we've got our elderly parents at home and we genuinely fear for their safety. And when something like this happens, Thomas will never be able to actually lay at home comfortably thinking his parents are safe. That's the risk we have going forward. And what do I say again? It goes back to that core thing. Where are our police resources so we've got the front line active when they need to be? If we had response times in the state, we could see if there was a problem over time, and that would mean when things like this are happening, we could actually turn around and go, the police are there in a minute, 10 minutes or 20 minutes. Is it appropriate? The same as we have with ambulance and fire services, the same as every state has. Victoria doesn't have it. Thomas will be always thinking, were the people there on time? What could have happened? How could we have prevented this? Well, the way to do it is more police patrols, making sure the streets are safe, getting police back out in the beat rather than some of them behind the desks, and ensuring that they're out there to protect our community.
Brad Batten, most Australians are good people. Most people have a warm heart, and charity is at the heart of what a lot of Australians do. I know you were a former police officer, and you're very much involved in fundraising, particularly for the great fight against MND, which is the BigFreeze, which Neil Danaher, of course, obviously set off, and it'll be on again in Melbourne at the weekend at the MCG. But you've got a local BigFreeze on tonight. Who's going to be there?
Well, I know we've got a couple of the Carlton boys. We've got CJ from Hawthorn. We've got Bianca Chatfield. There's a few of the netballers coming along. I'll say myself is obviously one of the ones going down the slide. I'll be dressing up tonight. No one knows just yet, and I'm sure when they hear this, I'm going down as Mike Trout, who's one of my favourite baseballers. I think it's really important that local groups get involved in the MND cause as well. Whilst it raises really good money and urgent money required for the research that we all know that Neil Danaher has fighting for and will make positive change, I'll tell you the biggest thing out of this, Steve, and I'm sure that I'm backed up by Neil Danaher on this. We're going to have 3,000 people in our community coming together as one at a time we need it. And if you want to talk about crime prevention, get your community together around sports clubs and community groups, get them engaged with each other, and that will in itself be the best crime prevention we can have in our community. I'm looking forward to it tonight. I'm looking forward to catching up with all those people in Beaconsfield. I'm not looking forward to going into the ice.
Yeah, no, I don't know that the ice bath will be all that great. Brad, thank you very much for joining us. Congratulations on the work you're doing. We'll talk again, and we'll keep the pressure up on this whole issue